Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Directors of the Vallecitos Water District for Wednesday, September 20th, 2017, 5 p.m. Could I ask Director Sinella to lead us in the pledge?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call, please?
Here.
Here.
Present.
Here.
Here. Okay, next is the adoption of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt tonight's agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carries unanimously. Public comment. Persons wishing to address a matter not on the agenda may be heard at this time. However, no action will be taken until the matter is placed on a future agenda in accordance with board policy. And I don't have any requests to speak at this, you can't hear. Sorry about that. I don't have any requests to speak for this portion of the meeting, so we'll move on to consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar will be voted upon by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a board member or member of the public requested a particular item be removed from the consent calendar, in which case it will be considered separately under action items.
Move to approve.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carries unanimously. Okay, on to our single action item for tonight, 2.1, which is a public hearing to consider water and wastewater service rate changes, changes to the charges. This is the time and place for this hearing, and I'll turn it over to General Manager Perum so he can provide details.
All right, thank you, Director Elitharp. As you mentioned, tonight is the public hearing to consider changes to the water and wastewater rates for calendar years 2018 and 2019. Per Article 13D of the California Constitution, which was enacted back in 1996 with the passage of Proposition 218, it is a requirement of a public agency to conduct a public hearing prior to changing water and wastewater rates. Notices for tonight's public hearing were sent out on July 24th of this year, and the notice was sent to all customers in our service area, so that was over 22,000 notices that were sent out. And according to Proposition 218, a majority of the affected customers of the district would need to file a written protest in order for the rates to not go into effect, meaning if the majority threshold is not met, then the majority protest threshold is not met, the rates will go into effect. The establishment of the proposed rates does follow a very objective process. We try to determine the costs to deliver water and wastewater services and make sure they're fairly apportioned to those customers that receive the benefits from those services. And the process to establish those rates and charges is called a cost of service and rate structure study. And the board approved that cost of service study back on June 7th of this year. So staff tonight will walk the board and the public through the results of this process. We'll show the proposed rates for 2018 and 2019. We'll show the impact of those rates on various different customer types and classes. We'll show how the Vallecitos rates compare to the rates of other water districts in San Diego County. We'll explain the factors that are driving the proposed rate increases. We'll try to explain what Vallecitos has done to reduce their costs. As we all know, costs are the big driver for rates. And we'll show the impact of those proposed rates on the district's financial reserves. Staff will then try to summarize and respond to some of the comments and themes that we received through majority protest letters that we've already received. Prior to the preparation of this presentation, we had received 22 protest letters. 6 additional letters came in today for a total of 28 letters. And previously, the board had been provided with the 22 letters, so we have copies of all those. And in front of you on the dais is the copy of the most recent 6 letters. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can put in a majority protest letter at tonight's meeting. And I've already received a couple of those tonight. So at this point, I'm going to ask Assistant General Manager Scaglione to come up. He's going to walk you through the details of the Proposition 218 process.
Thank you, General Manager Pruitt, members of the board. As General Manager Pruitt mentioned, today we'll be discussing the proposed rates. We'll also look at the impacts to reserves and financial performance. And then we'll look at some specific comments that came in on the rate protest and address those. We'll talk about the cost of service and rate structure study that was prepared, and then recommend rates for 2018 and 19. So the proposed rates, as you see them on the 218 notice that went out, we look at our average customer, which is a water and sewer customer with a 5/8" meter using 13 units of water. That makes up 73% of our customers. And the overall effect from these proposed rate increases are a 4% increase in 2018 and a 4% increase in 2019. When we break that up between water and sewer, the sewer we're not proposing an increase, but the water bill total for ready to serve and commodity 6% in 2018 and 5.8% in 2019. Those are the ones that make up the 4%. And then the 218 notice goes into a little bit of detail for all the different size meters. These rates are listed on that 218 notice. Biggest change probably to look at is in the multi-dwelling unit. That's the additional assessment for ready to serve for multifamily. And that's going down quite a bit as a result of the study of costs that drive that. And then on the other graph that's on the 218 notice is, as General Manager Pruitt mentioned, we didn't just look at a cost of service study. We also looked at a rate structure study. We also performed that as well. And the changes that were proposed and accepted in that were basically looking at tiers that tied to our usage behaviors for our own district. So tier 1 is tied to the average minimum monthly use, which is for 5/8" meters, 6 units, and the average maximum monthly use, and that's the 21 units that you see there. So that structure has changed a little bit. There's an extra unit in tier 1 for the 5/8" meter, and in the bar across the middle of that screen just kind of shows how those rates are spread, and we're only proposing 3 tiers instead of 4 that we have now. For the rates that we're proposing for 2018 and 19, we always focus on average, but this slide kind of shows you, well, how does it impact a lower user or a high user or a very high user? So 6 units is all in that first tier. This is looking at a 5/8" meter. And so that's just see the impact there, 2.9% in 2018, 4.1% in 2019. We discussed the 4% impact. This is water and sewer for the average customer. The high one you see there is no tier 3. It's right up to the tier 2 limit, and that's a high usage. And you see what the impacts are there, 1.5% and 4%. Because it's a rate structure change, it's not even across the board. Very high is just there as a kind of a frame of reference. That accounts for about, I would say, I think we looked at the numbers, 90 customers consistently use over 21 units, and of that, about 5 customers consistently use over 42 units, just to put that in a frame of reference. But those are the increases that those high users would see. And then we don't look at things in a vacuum. Even though we're only proposing 2 years of rate increases, we look out 5 and 10 years on our projections and make every attempt to smooth the rate increases so you don't see spikes. And even though we're using reserves to get through these next 2 years, we plan on trying to restore those reserves, and we'll see that later. And these are the rates that we look at in 5 years, not a component of this proposal, but just to show how we do plan and try to smooth out rates. And this is a busy slide. I'm not going to go over it, but it's just as a matter of record. This presentation has been online too, and you've seen this before. Not just looking at 5/8" meters, but what's the impact to the different meters across the district, different sizes, and agricultural customers and multifamily customers. And again, we look at it for low, average, high use, and very high use. So again, that's just presented for information for the public as well. And I don't, also to mention too, and we'll mention it later, there has been a rate calculator online as well, so customers can look at their specific impacts. We also look at rates compared to the county average. Now these are Vallecitos' existing rates and the Vallecitos' proposed rates for water compared to the that's proposed for 2018 compared to 2017 rates. We know now what some of the 2018 rates will be for some of the other agencies, but just for a matter of consistency, these are all 2017 rates. So for our low use, we're below the average, below the median with what we're proposing. For the average use, still below the county median, below the county average as well. And that's, again, some of these will shift higher, so we'll be even further below. This is comparing our 2018 with everybody else's 2017. For high use, still no tier 3 use. It's right up to tier 2 use. We're below the average, below the median. And then for the very high use, again, very few customers in this category, but you would see a very high use. And that's because, as you see later, part of the way we achieved keeping, if you recall, last year we had a 26% increase in the cost of water purchases. We were able to keep that rate down, and this year's rate down by shifting the burden of that expensive water to high users as an incentive to conserve.
Just a quick question, just to go over it.
Mhm.
Number one, your graph doesn't fit fully on our machine here, just so you know.
Oh.
The first row benchmarks isn't on here.
Oh,
So
I didn't know.
I'm looking at that one, and I can't see that well, but just for future.
Mm-hmm.
You're showing the very high use here is third from the top, but the very high use, that 297.85, is for people that use how much water?
That's 42 units for a 5/8 inch meter.
And how many customers do we have that use that much water?
Consistently, well, about 5 customers, I think it was, single-family resident, that can every month use over 42. But just as a frame of reference, some, in addition to that, some will go over it once in a while. And as a frame of reference, about 90 customers consistently go over 21 units.
Okay, and that's out of the 22,000 customers we have.
22,000, yeah. About 17,000, so 5/8 inch meters. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just to clarify, is that just residential customers, or is that
Correct.
business customers as well?
No, that was residential customers. Very few commercial customers go over that with 5/8 inch meters, go over that threshold. There's very few compared to, probably percentage-wise it's about the same, but very, very few customers, yeah. And then the question we get a lot is what drives rates. So what we did here is we looked at our budget, our 16-17 budget compared to the budget that was recently adopted for fiscal year 17-18, and looked at the big increases, not only operationally, but also our capital replacement needs, things that our rates would cover. And so no surprise, water purchases, a $2.3 million increase. Operations is a $600,000 increase. Capital replacement is a $1.9 million increase over prior year. And then salaries and benefits, about $40,000 increase over last year. So those are the things that drive rate increases. And then what have we done to reduce cost? We don't focus on what do we need to increase our rates by. Every year we do the budget, we focus on how can we cut and how can we reduce costs first. And that's done obviously at the board level, but even before it gets to the board, our budget process is a very participative budget process, so we have multi-levels of cuts. Our staff make budget requests of the supervisors look at the requests and they cut at that level. Then from the supervisor level it goes to the management level. Management makes cuts at their level, and before it even goes to the general manager and to the board for review, there are multi-levels of cuts, just operational expenses and requests that are made that are not granted. And plus, during the budget process, one of the big things is salaries, and so we look at positions, and if we're able to eliminate positions, we do, and we were able to do that in this budget process. Also, sometimes it takes money to make money. Well, we make investments to make operational expenses lower in the future, and we've made a lot of investments, and we have over the years, in technology. For example, we have a lot of remote monitoring now where we don't have to constantly go to sites to do rounds, what are called rounds and things. We can check flows and stuff remotely. E-logger is a thing we throw out there a lot. It's a program that's very pervasive through every application that we have at the district, and it was designed to code things in-house and save money, keep our consultant costs down. And it also eliminates a lot of duplication. What goes into our field computers is updating our asset management system automatically instead of having to duplicate. That's just a couple of examples of what that does. That was a great investment. And then energy efficiency over the years, solar panels here, other solar projects that we're looking at, pumps and motors, also advanced treatment components at our MRF plant that we look at, filter media we put in recently to help reduce chemical costs. We also do chemical cost studies to see how we can reduce chemical usage there. And we've been very successful at that, keeping our chemical costs down. And also on-site generation of chlorine rather than the gas chlorine, which also addresses a lot of safety issues as well. Cost sharing, we have partners throughout the district. You know, we consider our fellow agencies as partners. Leavenham Municipal Water District, we work closely with them to share costs, and even with the recent agreement we have for them to treat water, they treat it for less than the San Diego County Water Authority treats water. So we're able to save money there as well. And then controlling benefit costs, you know, for example, vision and dental insurance, we bid those frequently, keep everybody honest on the costs that they're charging the district for benefits, and we scrutinize those as well. And with employee cost sharing now, we've been able to reduce benefit costs. So what impacts do these rates and what we're planning for the future? Again, we don't look at just 1 or 2 years. Here I'm looking at 5 years. We actually look 10 years out. But we are, in order to keep these rates down, we are using reserves. We don't want to do that year after year. We want to plan ahead. So that blue line in the middle is our reserves for our replacement reserves on the water side, and it's smiling because we do pick up a little bit at the end of that 5-year period. You see that kind of smile. Yeah, we're using reserves now, but we plan to a smooth rate ramp to restore those reserves. And in those you see the 6%, 5.8% is what we're proposing. But then what can we anticipate for years after that? And fortunately, we'll be able to restore those reserves and keep rates relatively low. And then on the sewer side, you know, we're able to not increase rates. Yes, we'll use a little bit of reserves in our sewer side, and we'll have to pick them up and try to restore those. So we would anticipate some increases within that 5-year window. This is a busy slide, but if you can focus on the 3 lines other than the blue line, those lines are what we call our debt service coverage ratio. So we have typical for an agency, especially a growth agency like us, to have debt. The yellow line is our covenant. That means that's what we're required to make debt service payments. We're required to have revenues at 1.15 times our principal and interest on our debt, the payments that we make on our debt. And the very top line, that reddish-looking line, is what we project our debt service coverage to be. So that's a very good story. That's very positive. Even though it's going down, it's still pretty high. But our target is if we didn't have any property tax revenue or any revenue coming in from new construction or capital facility fees, that's the gray line that hovers very close to that yellow line. That's our target. We want to be above that, and we're achieving that, so that's good news. The news that isn't so good is the blue line, and that's related to the days in cash you see on your right. And what that means is, for those numbers you see on your right-hand side of the screen, that just means if we stopped all the money stopped coming into the district, how long can we survive. The average for a AA rated is 433 days. So we're well below the average, but because we have a good debt service coverage ratio and a plan to recover from the reserves that we're losing, we were able to maintain our AA plus rating. And then I want to address some comments we received specifically, and we did reply to, we couldn't reply in time to the ones we just received, but we did reply and give a personalized response to these rates protests that you see. These are repeated on the slides following. These were the comments that we're able to pull out, the unique comments. Most of the protests were simply, we protest the rate. But some of them also included concerns and some questions, and those are the ones that we wanted to address, and address them publicly for the benefit of the audience we have today. So one of the questions that we had was, have you ever considered a senior discount? Or I used to get a frugal use discount. What happened to that? So we saw those questions there. Vallecitos Water District is a public entity. We're a public utility, and we're subject to the California Constitution. And General Manager Prum mentioned a little bit about Prop 218, where we're allowed to charge a fee for the service we provide, for the water we provide, but we cannot charge more than the cost of that service. And since that's our only revenue source, if we were to provide a senior discount or a discount for a frugal user or a low-income discount, that's called a subsidy. That money for that discount would have to go from somewhere else, and it would come from the other ratepayers. That cost to the other ratepayers that are not seniors, that are not frugal users, that are not low income, would not be a cost of service. That's not a cost necessary to provide the service. So unfortunately for us, since we're a special district, we can't offer those discounts. Cities can, because they have a general fund to pull from, but we're a special district without a general fund to pull from. Another comment that we would get is rate increases should not be greater than ongoing inflation. I kind of agree. I wish that was the case here, but because we're a utility, we have expenses that we incur. For example, there were a few years, if you remember, the cost of concrete and steel going through the roof. Our typical costs of construction, and particularly on the capital side, increase more than average inflation rate. We also have a situation, when you think about when we came into being in 1955, and then when we grew a lot in 1970s and 80s, what was happening? We were putting all this infrastructure in. The further out we go down the line, the more infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So this is exponential component that not only are those costs going up beyond normal inflation, but the amount of infrastructure and the amount of pipes and equipment and things that need to be replaced are growing every year. That's why you see our target for reserves grow every year, because there's a need for that. So that's why it's typical for any water agency that, increases are greater than inflation. That's why the cost of water is so much greater than inflation. That's what's in the cost of water, all the infrastructure to get it here. Water's cheap. It's getting it here that's very expensive, right? Another comment was, look at your customers, not at your bottom line. Our mission is water and wastewater specialists providing sustainable and exceptional service. And that's very important. We are not a for-profit entity. I'm glad we got this comment, because we don't look at our bottom line. What we look at, people always say, why are you telling people to conserve? You're losing revenue. We're not, that's not our goal, is to make as much revenue as we can. Our goal is to be here next year, 10 years from now, and forever, to continue to provide service, water, of the highest quality and reliability. Any money we make beyond our revenue goes to our reserves to help to maintain our infrastructure. So this was a great comment. I'm glad we got it. Obviously, last year when we had a 26% increase to our cost of water, if our bottom line was our only concern, we would have raised rates by 26%. So we do pay attention to our customers. Rate protests, another comment we got is those that conserve have no incentive to conserve. And actually it's very inherent, particularly in the rate structure change that we made. The way we were able to keep down the rates for the average user is to shift the burden of the high-cost desalinated water to that third tier of usage. So there's a pretty good incentive to conserve, because if you don't conserve, you're going to be in that third tier, and you're going to get that expensive water. So yeah, it's just inherent in the rate structure. We don't have any monetary incentives to conserve. That would be against Prop 218, but we try to do that within the rate structure and within the confines of California Constitution. Another comment we had, and it was a unique comment, but the board members are paid $1.5 million in salaries, pensions, and cell phones. And just to set the record straight, the pay, benefits, meeting costs, expense reimbursements total $200,000 last calendar year. There's no pension for board members, as you know, and no phone allowance. So I'm not sure where that information came from. But another comment, a good comment, you should be investing in upgraded facilities and equipment to reduce operational costs and improve operational efficiencies. This is just a repeat of the slide I had before to show, yeah, a big part of what we do, yeah, we have to put some money out to make these investments, but for the future, they really do reduce operating costs, and we've seen a lot of success, especially at our treatment plant, our sewer treatment plant with that. One comment is no transparency or detail on revenue that rate increases will provide and will be used for, pensions, salary, and such. So the budget itself was really, before we get to rates, when it's kind of done at the same time, and the budget was a very transparent process. As you know, we had a lot of public meetings to do the budget. The budget's been online. When we had the recommended budget, it was online. It's a very public process. The revenues that would be generated from the proposed increase are included in the budget and detailed in there as well. To answer the question specifically, before considering the capital component that we need to address, we have a loss of $348,000 projected for fiscal year 2018 and $1.6 million of income projected for fiscal year 2019. That's before depreciation, so obviously both years are losses. That's why we're using reserves. The benefits, the question was specifically on benefits. They increased by about $93,000 in the budget, about 1.6% increase, and there was a slight decrease to salaries. The cost of service and rate structure study, again, was a very public process, and that's been online as well. We had 12 public meetings on that as well. And there's a cost of the study has been online, like I said, and it provides details on exactly how rates are calculated and exactly what the rates cover. Another comment on the protest letters was rate increase would not affect customers equally. Most affected would be residential. That's what this comment was. And part of that is true. Rate increases do not affect customers equally. With the structure change, higher users are going to pay more. But the increase for residential was the same as commercial, was the same as irrigation. It's by meter size, not by customer type. We make no distinction. So the increase to residential was the same as the increase for the other categories by customer. Okay, now the rate structure study, again, was a very transparent process. The process included planning. If you recall, we met and we mutually agreed upon some of the objectives. First thing we do is project demand, very important to have conservative projection of demand. We established customer classes, kept them at meter size, established tier breaks. That was a little bit of a change. We determined what percentage of cost to allocate to each tier, and then what cost to allocate to each charge, and then calculated the rates. That's basically what the cost of service and rate structure study did. Just to go over some of the objectives of that, and all the objectives were met. And this is old news. This was done and finished and presented on June 7th, but just to reiterate for the benefit of the public, we provided rates and a rate structure to the board for approval. We looked at our very first meeting, if you recall, we looked at alternatives where practical. We did a lot of workshops and meetings to keep the board apprised of the process and make sure we're on the right track. What we presented, the alternatives, are all legal and defensible. We provide a thorough and understandable administrative record. Part of that is the cost of service study that's online. Part of that is this presentation that we're doing today. That's all online. So we have a very robust administrative record for that. And we kept in mind the mission of the and vision of the district as well as we went through the process. Nothing in the rate, the recommended rates structure is arbitrary. The tier levels, the cost acceleration from tier to tier are all based on either a cost or on our customers, Vallecitos' customers' behaviors, their usage behaviors. The revenue requirement, we exhausted all efforts to cut costs through the budget process, and it's a sensitive balance because if you're cutting costs, you still want to maintain a certain quality of customer service and keep a workforce engaged as well. So those objectives were met. These are a little bit technical, but how the rates were actually calculated for ready to serve, how the revenue requirement rolls up and is spread across the ready to serve. If there's any questions, I'll go across, address them, but this is pretty technical, but an excerpt from our cost of service study. The commodity charge is a little easier, you know, what costs roll up behind, and most of it's purchased water, probably 80% of it's purchased water, but then dividing that by the demand, and that's how we come up with the rates for the commodity charges. The cost of service and rate structure study is online, as well as the 218 notice is online, as well as a rate calculator that has been online as well. The remainder of the presentation is technical. You've seen it before. I've included it for the benefit of the public that are online looking at it, and I'd be glad to answer any questions on that. But at this point, staff would recommend the proposed changes be adopted, and I'll just open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, at this time, I'll entertain questions from any of the directors.
I just have one. One of the letters that we received today, I know you didn't have a chance to answer it, but I'm wondering if you could, they were, shall I read the whole letter or just basic content?
Which letter are you referring
It's
to?
the letter from Richard and Wanda Patterson. Their main concern is that in the Tier 3 rate increase, and they have it at 59%, 533 to 847 for one unit does not seem reasonable. So I'd like to explain, if we
I can
can,
address that.
how we came up with Tier 3 and why that is such a large, because it's not just a rate increase, it has to do with our tier structuring as well.
Yeah.
Is that possible to be
Yeah,
addressed?
I can address that. Thank you for that question. It's actually our highest tier currently is our Tier 4, or $7.41 a unit. And so it's kind of a combination of the Tier 2. That's why I put this slide up so you can see. The 847, it's really, and this is only for the first 42 units. When you look beyond, it's an increase on the highest tier from $7.41 to $8.47, and there are a finite set of usage there that goes from $5.33 to $8.47. So the increase isn't just looking at the tier structure, it's a whole different tier structure. So it's not going from this Tier 1 to this Tier 1, and it's the same usage, this Tier 2 and this Tier 2 existing and proposed with the same usage. The whole structure is different. So when you look at it, you have to look at your usage before and look at your usage after, and chances are it's going to be about, especially if you use average rate, you know it's going to be about a 6% increase. So yes, the tier, if you compare the old Tier 3, which is not the highest tier, to the new Tier 3, it's a big increase. Yeah. But you still get the benefit of those lower tiers. So your bill is not going up 47%, no, or whatever the calculation was. No, it's just that whatever you use in the higher tier. Keep in mind, if you have a 5/8" meter, very unusual to be consistently in that tier. So you're.
This concern is coming from people who are in the 1 inch and.
Oh, the 1 inch
many
is, the 1 inch you get a,
Because
yeah.
that's,
I'm
my
glad you
division
mentioned
is
that.
filled with a lot of that.
1 inch you don't
I
reach
see
the,
you spread the tiers, and you might show
yeah.
how Tier 1
Absolutely.
expanded
Thank you.
from 5 units to 6 units.
Yes.
So that's a change. And Tier 2 expanded from 17 units to 21 units.
Yeah,
And Tier 3 actually moved up to 22, so those,
But that's
the
on
few.
that's on less than one.
That's a
Oh, that's less
5/8
than
inch
one,
meter, yeah.
sorry, I'm at the
Yeah.
wrong one.
The 1-inch meter, you
The
can use
6
up to 78 and never even incur that.
Right.
And 78 represents the highest, on average, that's the highest month. So the statistics I mentioned for the 1-inch meter are probably pretty close, for a 5/8 inch meter, probably pretty close for a 1-inch meter. There's very few customers that are using that. That meter is probably rated, a 5/8 inch meter is rated for about 25 units a month. That's the highest. And a 1-inch meter is probably rated close to 70, I would imagine. So if you're way up there, yeah. But-
I know, I understand, I messed it up by doing the wrong number, sorry, I should have been looking at the 1-inch. I mean, what we're trying to show is that in Tier 2, we've actually expanded it to include part of what was originally Tier 3. So part of it did go down from what you would have been charged if you'd been at Tier 3. Instead of jumping from 60 and then in Tier 3, you went all the way to 78 before the price goes up. And then, as we've said, in Tier 3, so we've broadened the tiers, which brought some of your units down from a 3 to a 2. And then we didn't bother with the 4th, and in the 3rd tier, we feel it's not just to get you to conserve, but the reason we need to have our water and imported water is we paying for the desal and these more expensive waters, and we're asking the people who really use more than the norm to pay for that. And that's why Tier 3 for everyone carries the brunt of sustainability, because our sustainability and reliability of our system relies on us being as judicious with our water usage as we can. So I know there's some in the audience who specifically were concerned, and I just want them to understand a lot of thought and effort went into this to try to figure out a way, and obviously it's not going to please everyone, but we're trying to be as fair as possible. And
Yeah,
you
and
can
if I-
add to that.
And if I can add to that, staff understands that this is complicated. There's a lot of variables when you look at meter size and tiers and the rates. And that's one of the reasons we put the rate calculator on the website. And I don't know if this particular customer, if the Pattersons were aware that was on there, but we'd certainly be happy to sit down with them and walk them through what the impacts would be to their situation without simply looking at what is the increase in Tier 3 unit cost of water. It's certainly more complicated than that.
I appreciate that,
Yeah,
and
really
I
do.
also would just like to say that to everyone in the audience and anyone who is listening to this, that option is available to anyone to call and come in and talk with, specifically with staff about your specific situation. Because we've gone through 6 months and hundreds of hours of this, and I still look at it right now and feel, do I really grasp it? And oh wait, what was that? And how does it affect me? And as you can see, I couldn't even read the lines right. So please feel free to speak. You have an open door, right?
Yep.
I also like to mention too, while you mention that, to stay out of that Tier 3 or minimize Tier 3 usage if you're in there. For example, if you have a 1-inch meter and you're consistently using over 78 units, we have a free water audit too, and it's right online to sign up for, where through Mission Resources, they come out and provide a water audit, and they test things, and we have nothing but wonderful things said about them to the customers that took advantage of that water audit, so that'll help keep costs down as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, just today we received a letter from a customer who had really high usage and was complaining about the impacts. So I passed it along to our water conservation folks to have them reach out to that customer and say, hey, your usage pattern seems to be excessive for your type of property and how it's developed in the size. So we're very engaged in helping people reduce their usage to what they really need. It could be a leak on the property, it could be over irrigation, but we'll try to help the customer get down as low as possible.
Okay, any other questions of staff?
Not at this time.
At this time, I'll invite the public to speak. I have 4 requests to speak, and I'll call out these in the order that I received them. So the first one I have is Bernard Henkes.
I'm just listening to what I've been listening to now, I can understand why the rates have to increase. I'm in a unique situation, I have a 5/8 meter, but I have a lot of fruit trees. I provide food for 5 families at no cost. Our families has gone, I used 50 units because it got so hot for a couple of months there. I used 50 units, it was 5/8 meters. And based on that, my rate is going to be, there's going to be a lot of dead trees. They just can't afford to do it. And I don't think there are very many people in that situation, but I'm in that situation right now. The only thing I can say is that I realize you can't keep going backwards. You have to make money. You have to balance the books. So I don't know if there's anything you can do to change that tier structure. The tier 3 is what's going to really kill me when it jumps up that high. And I've talked to several of my neighbors, and they're in the same situation. They have a lot of fruit trees, and the rates are out of the park.
I'm sure you're doing this, but I'm sure that you're doing this already, but just to confirm, I mean, you've looked at irrigation and the different systems and done everything to make it as efficient as possible.
I sure have. I've let my lawns die. All I've got is the fruit trees now. And very, very little vegetation other than that. We have to keep the green around the outside.
Sure.
To get ice plant. But other than that, yes.
If I could.
Director?
Another thing, I don't know, and you've probably, since you've been growing for a long time, but I have been talking with the Farm Bureau, and there are a lot of new techniques coming out and ways with the trees, everything from avocado to fruit trees, you know, the almonds and that. And I just have you considered calling, or I could get you the name of Eric Larson and his number with the Farm Bureau, and you could talk with him? Because I believe there's a lot of things that have changed from the way my dad grew an orchard, which is a long time ago. But just in recent years, there's a lot of different approaches, the way they water and mulch and how they keep the trees and where they plant them, and it might be something to look into to be of benefit.
I've already discussed that with them.
Oh, bless your heart.
And the mulching is a big thing. My neighbor will vouch for it. All those beautiful trees are looking pretty dismal right now because I cut back a lot of the water and I'm still in the tier 4. So you use 50 units, that's a lot of water. But the one thing I'm concerned about is that the big jump in tier 3, that's really going to hurt me.
Yeah.
Yes, your suggestions are good, very good. But I've already pursued that.
Just if I may add, so one of the things our staff did, and I appreciate it, they kind of tried to anticipate the kind of questions we may get, so prepared a little chart. And to address the speaker's concern directly, if you have a 5/8 inch meter and you're using about 50 units per month, that will be about an 18.9% increase on your monthly bill. I'm not trying to downplay, that's a large increase, but I want to make sure that people understand the perspective. It's not 50, 60% increase, it's about a 19% increase.
I did the number.
You did, good, all right, thank you.
Thank you for your answers.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Wanda Patterson.
I live where this gentleman lives. He's out in unincorporated.
You can come up here if you
Yeah,
like.
please.
Yeah. Easier to hear you.
Unincorporated area out there. And the zoning in that area is a minimum of 1 acre. And there's a couple 2s and a few 3s. But the new subdivision going in right next to us is starting at 3 and running up to 15. And we can't make it on 21 units. We've never made it on 21 units. So this tier 3 is going to hurt all of the houses where I'm at. You've done a really good case of explaining what the problem is. I understand. We can't have you running $800,000 negative every year. That's a no-brainer. And I appreciate what you're saying. I understand that the jump may be 59%, but the overall is only 19% for the rest of us. But it still hurts a little bit. I just wanted to let you know that. And this guy lives next door to me. So it's hard to have these large parcels. And they want you to put something on them. I mean, bare dirt is not too good out there. Then the fire marshal shows up and he says, dear, I need some ice plant on this bank. You've got 400 feet of it. I want this, if you're gonna put ice plant here, it needs to be green. Water, water, water. I can hear it drinking. So it's hard for us out there to make it on what you're offering us. And now it's gonna be a little bit harder. But thank you for trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mike Hunsaker.
Mike Hunsaker, 115 Equestrian Court. I had one question to start, and this is on the, for the small farmers. And at one time, there was a rule that the first 26 units, I believe it was, is charged at residential rate, and then the additional units were at an agricultural rate, which is semi-understandable because most of these small farms have their residents there. But why 26? And what happens in a drought when you start reducing residential use and everything above that becomes $500 a unit potentially? I would hope in the future when you accept these that you will do what you had promised before, and that is to have 6 o'clock meetings rather than 5 o'clock. As for the rate structure, one of the problems we're going to have is that we do not address the marijuana growth issue. Agriculture for growing fruit, vegetables, water is a big thing. And you get maybe $1 to $9 a pound for your produce. But marijuana, we're talking about $1,500 a pound and more. This makes the water cost and the tiers irrelevant. Furthermore, most of our agriculture is up in the Twin Oaks area. That is where the desal water is coming in. The desal water, when mixed, is 4 times higher quality than the water the residents get. Why should we pay for desal water for agriculture, specifically marijuana? What are we going to do to keep excessive use for that one agricultural product? And most of the third tier, I understand, is for the desal water rates. Well, if we're not going to get the desal water, and you're promoting possibly indirectly and maybe unintentionally the growth of marijuana, why should we be subsidizing these water users? I could see $3.38 for growing fruit, but I don't see why I should be paying for marijuana. And that starts January 1st, 2018. And I see all sorts of how nurseries going up with barbed wire and security cameras. I don't think they plan to grow tomatoes.
Question. Do you see those in our community, Mike?
Yes,
Really?
yes.
Could you identify a couple
One
of
across
sites?
from Twin Oaks Elementary. And there's some across Twin Oaks up around Solver Lane. But the big thing is we have a lot of agriculture. They have every incentive to change over crops from a low yield monetarily to a very, very high one.
Couple things. I'm hoping staff will clarify the part about desalination only going to the Twin Oaks Valley, because that's not true. And
Yeah, I'll have our operations
Mr.
manager.
Hunsaker knows that, but he still said that, so hopefully we clarify that. Secondly, have you talked to this gentleman about changing his crop? If you're so knowledgeable on marijuana, I don't know anything about it.
Well,
but
that,
if
a
you
lot
are-
of small farmers are considering it. But if there's a 26 unit minimum for a small farmer who has to live on his property, and then there's a drought and he gets restricted, he's out of the market altogether.
Yeah, but
If
you-
you just want to grow oranges, that's another
But you
problem.
understand that we're not in a position as a board to tell anybody what they can or cannot grow legally on their property.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of a moot point, really. I mean, at the end of the day, because if he decided to change his crops to marijuana, more power to him. He's a private landowner. And if it's legal to do so, this board doesn't have any sort of authority to tell him what he can or cannot grow on his land.
No, but you have the authority to set rates accordingly and protect all the ratepayers.
No, so Mike, I don't want to argue with you back and forth.
Yeah,
but you
I understand that.
We cannot, but we got to set the record straight, because every week you come here and you say stuff that's just complete garbage. We cannot charge one crop grower a different rate than another crop grower. So if we did what you said, we wouldn't have any agriculture in San Diego County, at least not in our water district, because nobody would be able to afford to do it. Because we can't just pick out one crop grower, especially when they're not, apparently not going to be breaking the law after January 1st, as you say. We cannot charge them a separate rate than we're charging somebody who grows avocados or oranges or anything else. So really, it's a moot point.
No, it's a point of where you allow cultivation, but it is beyond what you're saying, and I understand and agree with it. But this is a problem that's coming up. It's going to be a major water problem, and I think it should be addressed now.
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
One thing I'd like to add, I think Mr. Hunsaker knows this already, but our desal water does not come in through Twin Oaks. Our desal water comes in from over on Cherokee. It's a separate pipe, and it goes to mostly what's known as the downtown area, which is the low-level valley area, not up to Twin Oaks. So completely another misinformed
Yeah,
adventure.
A blended amount comes in at Twin Oaks, that's part of the water authorities.
If you'd like, I could have Mr. Pedrazi come up and explain
Oh,
it.
yeah, that's it.
I had a question too.
Question over here?
That's okay, I'll wait, I think Ed will answer it.
Yes, Director Martin's correct. 95 to 99% of the water from the desal plant that we're taking in comes into the downtown area. Occasionally, we do pump over the hill into the San Elijo area in order to make our agreement during the wet winter months when we have them. And then the Twin Oaks area, I think the confusion there is the water authority pumps from the plant all the way up to Twin Oaks, their treatment plant up there, and they blend inside their Clearwell reservoirs and then back into the aqueduct. But our first connection after they put that into the aqueduct system is down where we're already taking the desal water. So we get occasionally a blend at our Vallecitos 7 connection in San Elijo, but most of the time in San Elijo Hills, we're buying from Levenheim. So the bulk of our desalinated water is downtown.
And then there was a comment that the water is 4 times better?
It meets all the state and federal standards. It depends on your definition of better. It is lower in total dissolved solids. So there's less salts,
about half.
less salts in it,
Yeah,
yes.
about half.
And that depends on where our other source water is coming from. Colorado River, it's around 600 parts per million. The state project water is around 300, and we're getting in the 200s from the desal plant.
I appreciate it. I know you don't put colored drops in the water so I can trace each drop of desal through our system. I hope most of you understand your water is a blend, and it could be a mix of anything at any time, and no one area is receiving a Levenhain and this one just desal and this one Colorado.
Yeah, it changes seasonally, it can change daily.
Seems like it would be that easy, but believe me, it isn't. I want that understood.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for clarifying this information.
Okay, our next speaker is Loretta McKinney.
Good evening, President Eltharp, board members, and community. This evening, I come to you to share my disapproval with the staff's recommendation to increase water rates by 4% in 2018 and another 4% in 2019. As a former government employee and administrator of 34 years in various jurisdictions, I totally understand the challenges of meeting inflationary costs to continue providing services. However, as an administrator, I also understand that there is a breaking point where covering the cost of doing business cannot exceed the income realities of the community you exist to serve. So far, the Consumer Price Index has risen only 1.9% for 2017, and for the 3 previous years, on average, the CPI has increased by less than 2%. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the real average hourly earnings for all employees increased only 0.6% from August 2016 to August 2017. Of course, this data does not address those who are living on a fixed income. Given these numbers, with the caveat that there is no indication of any significant change for the future, it is difficult to accept a total of 8% increase in water services for 2018 and 2019. While I can truly empathize with your dilemma, I respectfully challenge staff to think out of the box and to find new methods of meeting the increasing cost of doing business and to continue to provide the excellent services within the Consumer Price Index and realistic income parameters of the communities that they exist to serve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great comments, thank you.
Okay, I have no other requests to speak, but at this time I'll invite any member of the public to come up and speak if you'd like. Okay. Seeing none, at this point, I'll ask if the board has any other questions. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close this public hearing. At this point, I would look for a motion from the board
So moved.
to adopt the rates and charges contained in the public notice.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the rates and charges contained in the public notice. Any further discussion?
I'd just like to make a statement. I served on the Finance Committee the last 2 years, and this year I will say that our staff and our new General Manager Pruitt has really done a great job at cost cutting wherever it can and still provide the service that you expect, the quality that you expect, as well as the wastewater disappearing from your houses as you expect. They've done a great job at it, and I think that our General Manager Pruitt has stepped it up quite a bit, and I expect more in the future. Compared to everyone else and all the numbers you hear out there, our rate increase is significantly less than what other water authorities are doing throughout San Diego County. And I think by the end of the year, you'll actually see that, but we'll drop further down on the chart that's up there right now as far as compared to everyone else. A very thin line that our general manager has done. He's really made some significant changes in the way we operate, and I expect more over the coming years from him. He's doing an excellent job. So that's a statement I just wanted to make.
Director Snow.
Thank you, President. Kind of echoing what Director Martin just said, you know, I'm typically one who's not in favor ever of rate increases, and I know this board and staff has put up with a lot of kind of my nonsense over the few years that I've been here. And I really appreciate your comments, because I think it is important that we look at cutting costs and look outside the box, like you said. And we've done a lot of things. I mean, through technology, we've implemented a number of operational efficiencies. You saw in the presentation, we've eliminated 4 positions. That's never easy to do. That's 4 people that don't have jobs right now. We've reformed our employee pension programs, our employee medical benefits, their Social Security contribution. We've reformed that. These aren't easy things for us to do, and you know, you can cut and cut and cut, but eventually you're going to hit the bone. And we read about and we hear about places like Flint, Michigan, where they try to cut corners, and now they have no water at all. We've actually been very proactive in trying to diversify our water supply, bringing on desalination, bringing on other sources of water, such as enhancing our recycling capabilities. We are looking at another outside-the-box option right now with this property that we have right behind us, that you guys all have, 35 acres of land right behind us this hill. We're currently working with a consultant to maybe look into ways that we can generate revenue outside of water sales to help offset your rates, but with that land, instead of just having a piece of land that's sitting there really doing nothing. So whereas I've voted no for the last rate increase, and I think probably the one before that, and I don't typically vote yes for rate increases, but I think we're at the point where we've thought outside the box and we've made those tough cuts and done a lot of very difficult things that we're at the point where if we don't start, raising some rates some, that we're gonna be in a position like Flint, Michigan, and that's not where we wanna be, so. I hope, and I appreciate, most of you guys, were empathetic to some of the position that we're in, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for your comments. Any other? Director Hernandez?
And I too want to thank you for your letters. I mean, out of 17,000 services, we've got 2836 letters, and the folks that came tonight, I appreciate it very much. The extra effort that you've put into letting us know how you feel, and believe us, we pay a bill too. We don't get, and I'm looking at my bill and I'm going, man, that's a lot of money that I'm spending in a month. I do want to just reemphasize that the reason this is only a 4% increase is we've taken some of our reserves, and subsidized that. Because it was true, what Director Sinella said, when we first saw this, it took our breath away. We said, no, we just cannot present this kind of an increase, although it was not what I call outrageous. Thank you very much. I looked online as to what food costs are average, and therefore 3.4% this year. So there are other commodities that are going up even more than our water. But the point I wanted to make was we have taken some of our savings and reserves to subsidize to keep this low. And so I thank you again for your participation. And reiterating what said, come down, talk to us. We're not like some other agencies where you're going to get on the rotating dial of putting you dial 1, bit 2, all that. You can walk in our front door and you'll talk to a real person. Thank you.
If I may?
Sure.
I think the gentlemen have said very well what's been happening, but I would like to say that I feel really confident that this budget and the budget process and the staff and what we did in our cost of service studies, that we are truly doing the best we can, that we are trying to run as tight and mean a machine as possible, that we want to maintain the qualities we've always had. There's a lot of stress as well as learning that went into this decision, and I appreciate the letters from each of you and your comments, and that you took the time to be here. I also would like to say, as Jim pointed out, we've used our reserves to try to keep the rate raises down. Those reserves, I want you to understand, a lot of people think that the reserves are like this little petty cash and general funds. Those reserves are built because they're replacement reserves. There's a reason for them. It's for what needs to be done in the future so we don't have a Flint situation or a giant sinkhole in the middle of our streets. And we need to make choices, and I will say one of the things I commend this GM and staff on this is that they and the finance department really looked at our reserves and were willing to find a way to not just cut costs, but to bring our reserve expectations more into control. That's been incredibly helpful. And finally, I would like to say that 2 years ago, we did look at trying to address a fund for seniors and low-income families. And what we found out was the only way we can do this is to form like a foundation separate from us and get someone to bequeath us a lovely endowment to run it, because there's no way for us to do that. And I know we thought about pooling our income, but we just couldn't come up with enough between the 5 of us.
What about that $1.5 million?
Well,
Yeah.
I think we had to start with a 20,000, and this areas that we looked at who'd run the program, it was incredibly difficult to keep it consistent and keep it going. So we have thought about that as well, and I know San Diego's looking at something, and I'm real curious to see how they do. But thank you, and I want to thank the board and staff and our general manager. We're really trying hard to take care of everyone.
All right. Any other discussion? right, we have a motion and a second. Is this a roll call vote? Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carried unanimously. I'd like to thank the public for coming in. Thank you.
Can we take a vote, please?
Sure. Go ahead and take a 10-minute break.
Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Back in session. We're done with our action public hearing item. Now we're on to reports. General Manager.
Okay, just real quickly. So there will be one more step with the rate increases. We have to come back with an ordinance. So at the next regularly scheduled meeting, we'll bring the ordinance forward for adoption. That'll be the kind of final step towards implementing the new rates. The district's auditing firm will be on site, I believe it's next week, and they'll be doing their final field work. And then they'll take all that information that they gather and they'll go back and they'll do whatever the auditors do before coming back to the board with a final report. And that'll be presented to the board at a future board meeting. I think I mentioned last meeting, we were going to start our roof repairs. They have started, so we're in the process of doing some roofing repairs to the buildings on this property. We are in the process, or maybe even done with, preparing for the fire season. So we go out and we maintain our properties, creating fire breaks. So like on the property next door, we have a 20-foot fire break around it. We've ensured that the sprinkler system works if we want to pre-wet the area if the fire conditions so indicate. I expect that this could be a big fire season. We went from record-setting rains where everything grew to some of the hottest weather we've had and everything dried out. So coming into this year's fire season could be a big year. On the theme of looking for opportunities to do things better, we will be entering into an agreement with a company called InfoSend. We already have an agreement with them. They do all of our billing. So they print out the bills, they fold them, they stuff them in the envelope, and they mail them out. So that's what they do. But we're going to expand their uses, and they're going to help us deliver our 48-hour disconnection notices. So right now, that's up to staff to do. We have to go out and we have people drive around. So InfoSend, and they've proven this with other agencies, they have an arrangement with FedEx. So we'll just send a list of people that need to get notices to InfoSend. They'll coordinate with FedEx, and FedEx will drive them around, freeing up our staff to do more important things. So it's not a long-term commitment. It's only if we want to use their services, so there's no fixed amount. It's just on a per notice basis. So we'll monitor that, see how it works. Some local agencies, water agencies are already using it, and they're really happy with the service. And I think that's all I had. Oh, real quick, on the legislative front, there were several bills proposed regarding water use efficiency, and the way they were worded wasn't really favorable to the district and its customers. Neither of those bills got voted on in the last legislative session, which ended, I think, last week. But they can be taken up in the second year of the next legislative session, which begins January 3rd. But that gives the water agency some time to work on the language, so hopefully be more favorable to the districts. So, and that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Next is District Legal Counsel.
Glenn brought to my attention this AB 746. It's on the governor's desk, and basically that would require water districts to perform lead testing for school district properties. And it's basically to try to narrow down to see if there's any problems with school districts. I think you've seen some of that on the news in the city of San Diego and elsewhere, and we've actually done those tests here. I think the real key to the bill will be if there's anything discovered, who's going to be responsible for taking care of it. And if it's obviously on the school district property, then they've got to deal with it. If it was some coming from the source, obviously it would be our responsibility.
Hey, Jeff, are there not private firms that can test for lead?
Well, I think we have a pretty good program with respect to that, but this bill would mandate that the local provider of water would be required to do that.
We could certainly outsource that and use
Yeah.
a contractor to do it, but the cost would be up to the water
I
district.
don't know why this surprises me with California, but why wouldn't the bill that's on the governor's desk require the school districts to test their water?
Or at least to pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's their
there is a
it's their
kind of,
system.
as Glenn pointed out, a vaguely worded reimbursement, state mandated reimbursement to cover the costs. And I think that if anybody's going to get reimbursed for this, it's going to be the school district. I think they're going to be in more sympathetic position than we
Because
are.
we already test our water before it gets onto the property. So if there is lead in the water, most likely it's gonna get in there from their system, within their
Right.
pipes and their system.
Right.
So why, I just don't understand why wouldn't you just require it? I'm all for lead testing at schools. I
Sure.
don't want water in our, I don't want lead in our water at our schools. But it just doesn't make sense to me why you just require the school district to test. And I don't get it. And I know it's not your fault.
Yeah, no, I just think, I'm trying to think through it from a practical standpoint. The source is gonna be coming from the provider, the public agency. So I think there was sort of a natural, you guys are in the water business, you need to be able to assist the school district in this process. The testing expenses are presumably gonna be reimbursable,
Well,
but we'll see, you know.
Yeah, I think they saw how well and accommodating the water districts were in offering that service, and they've just said, okay, you did such a good job, that you might as well do it. And it's like a lot of things, and in the lead and copper rule, how that's a strange rule, because that's the only one that requires sampling within the home, actually inside the home. There's no other requirement we have as a public water utility that's like that, and that's kind of the same, it kind of goes along the same lines.
And this is kind of becoming an issue not only with regard to water, but everything else. School district, I don't know what they're doing for planning or thinking, but they want to teach. Sometimes great, sometimes not so great. Anything else, that's somebody else's problem. Deal with it. So I'm kind of happy see it happen.
I think when the time comes, for our agency, we need to tell the school district, test your own water, because what's gonna come next? Nursing homes, retirement homes? What's the mandate gonna be? We already test our water. If it's in the school, it's because of the school's plumbing, not because of us. So why are we the agency that needs to test the schools? That makes no sense whatsoever.
None.
Yeah, I share your concern. I see this as one of those slippery slope bills. Today, it's one
Oh.
thing that everybody can get behind. Tomorrow, it just puts more and more burden on us and our ratepayers.
Yeah, exactly.
If I may. I think the real issue is it's a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Flint.
Right.
It's a knee-jerk reaction to say a water district blew it, and all of us go into a panic and decide someone's got to do it, and the water district's the first one to do it, and it's got to be our fault, because it was Flint's fault. But I think everyone's made a very valid point, as well as you, that we need to really stay on top of this and make sure we take care of ourselves, because it will just continue to, as you say, slippery slide into the other. It's funny how many things are on the books, though, for knee-jerk reactions and not thought out. So, that's
The
unfortunate.
next step will be you're gonna have to take down the gold fire hydrant, because it stands for fire departments.
Okay,
Is there gold in that
Yeah, that's
water?
all.
We'll test for it.
all right, next is San Diego County Water Authority.
Well, there's just a couple of things. I was also going to mention about the legislation and just the bills that Glenn's already spoken about was AB 1668 and SB 606, and those were on the long-term water use efficiency. And I think the most interesting thing in the comment that I received from Glenn Farrell was that there was a lot of feelings that they were going to get this pushed through at the last minute. And at the end, there was enough against it that the authors decided not to, and made it a 2-year bill. And I think that's incredibly important for us, because we don't want to have all those stipulations the way they were. The second one, SB 5, is been passed, we're waiting for the governor to sign it, and that's the Parks Resource and Water Bond containing water for the Salton Sea, where everyone's so excited. It's for $4 billion for parks, but there's about $200 million for the Salton Sea restoration, and that's just such a critical part of all that's going on with IID and the Colorado River as well. And then I see the public goods tax was also set aside for a 2-year wait, so hopefully we can talk against that. That one is interesting. If you look at it, it's actually a fundamental contradiction to California's policy of the polluters pay. because the way that public goods fee is originally set up, 90% of it would be paid by the public, and 3% would be paid by the dairies, and 7% by ag. But 90% of most of the contaminants in the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley and Salinas is all from dairy and agriculture. And they're not paying for it. It's going to be the urban users. That was really interesting. I have the What's Hot report, but unfortunately I didn't get it stapled, so you'll have to get through. There's, if you want it, there's, I think, 5 sheets, 4 or 5. But they're like 8 in a row and 8 in a row and 8 in a row. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, you probably saw it or heard about it already, was that the at the last meeting I mentioned that the Water Board was feeling very nervous about MWD pushing to have them vote to participate in the California Water Fix, and that is on September 26th. So everyone's been asking, trying to get them to reschedule and not have them come forward with it because there's not any real basic information on the planning system. So the Water Authority and these other individual agencies have been asking, and they've sort of been ignored, but as you probably heard yesterday, Westland's Water District, which is out of Fresno, and it's the nation's largest irrigation district, voted 7-1 to not participate in the program. And it's very interesting, there's mixed emotions, because someone says, oh, that's a big heavy blow to the district, and I think in many ways it is, because it's a trend setter, and most of the agricultural districts have said they're not going to participate if they can't afford to. But I think the more interesting thing in this situation is that if you see what's being said by both John Laird, the Secretary of Natural Resources for California, and I think it's Jeff Keitlinger at MWD, is they've kind of taken an attitude of, well, we're disappointed, but they've gone into a process of sort of shaming Westlands and anyone else who wants to vote no by saying, you know, ignoring the situation isn't going to make it better, and, you know, if you just want to sit around and wait for something better to come along, it's going to, you know, risk the future. And the truth of it is, and they're deflecting this from the public, is this is not about whether we think it's a good project or not. Nobody wants to support it because there are no financial details, there is no plan, there's no cost allocations, and there's no limit set, particularly for us, by MWD on how much of this they'll finance. They've set out a 25% minimum, but with this no from Westlands, doesn't mean they won't say, well, we'll pick it up. So they're deflecting what's going on. People don't want to vote, not because it's a good or bad idea, but because we're being asked with blind faith to kind of sign an empty contract and offer a blank check off our ratepayers. So as you read the results, it's important to know the truth. And that's very interesting to me.
Question?
Yes.
So, knowing MWD, they're going to just do whatever they want. If they do we have an opportunity to sue or not pay, or do we just have to, because we have the pass-through, just pay whatever they say?
Well, I
We
think
can show them, sue. Let's sue them, yeah, we'll show them.
Well, show them. Well, actually, I think, I'm going to leave the real legal answer to our council, but I would say that the delegates and the Water District Board has worked really hard to ask for this rescheduling. They've got other agencies online. They've gotten a lot of organizations like the taxpayers and that saying this is not ready to be voted on. And there was just, I believe the same day Westland voted no, the city of Del Mar, as the mayor had sent a letter saying they're not asking, they're just asking that it be rescheduled for the vote once there is a detailed, informed plan and cost allocations and limitations, and if we know what we're paying for and what we're getting. Because the plan is just pie in the sky totally. And as far as MWD goes, we do have the option to sue, and I think the Water Authority has the option to look at trying to move away completely from MWD down the road if things happen. I mean, they're very proactive and they're looking at lots of things. And
Yep.
there's also a lot going on in closed session, but I will tell you this, they're not gonna take it like, oh, whatever. I
Good.
don't think the whole state is either. I'm very proud. I think Westlands did the right thing,
I just,
for the right
a
reasons.
comment on, I mean, we had a $7.5 billion water bond in 2014. You just talked about this 200, was it a $4 billion park bond, 200 million of which is gonna go to the Salton Sea, and now this unlimited California water fix potentially. Where's all this money going? And we're not, it's, California's water is not being fixed. So, I mean, I just rattled off $12 billion worth of bonds that I haven't seen any benefit from
Well, I
whatsoever.
will tell you, right, you're right, but on the Salton Sea, that's not really gonna fix the water. It's going to fix a situation that is a problem because of water and how water was used and put in a lake and what kinds of things went through the
Well,
agriculture.
couldn't they have just taken it out of the 7.5 billion?
The 7.5 million is
No,
also.
billion,
That billion is also tagged in certain ways, so yes, there's
Tagged.
probably more. Do you know the Salton Sea was actually asking for 700 million, and I don't even think it's really 200, I think it's 175 million in the final outcome, they keep taking away, but you're absolutely right, and unfortunately, your guess is as good as any of where the money's going. And this project,
Gross mismatch.
however, is 17 billion dollars.
Well, the 7.5 billion from the water bond, it's very little that's been spent. They haven't figured out
No.
how to spend the 2.8 billion that's designated for storage.
And we know how
They haven't even
much,
gotten to
no.
the point of figuring out how to spend that money.
Well, I
And
think
it's been years.
I think the 3,000 attorneys involved are spending a lot of that money.
All right.
Oh, good.
Thank you for that extensive report. On to Encino Wastewater Authority, Capital Improvement Committee.
We had our meeting this morning. We approved a engineering contract to review the repair of one of our major lines that is 50-plus years old. It was built in the 80s, and it's deteriorating at the top. So they're going to look at how to resolve it, and it's going to be a costly event. So I was already letting them know that I'm going to be very directly involved in the solution, because what they want to do is put a liner 552 feet in this 72-inch pipe. I mean, that's a hellaciously big liner. And they have 16 areas that need to be repaired, and I asked them about hand repairing them. And the concrete's still good. There's 6,000 PSI concrete, which is really tough concrete. So we've got these bad areas. And what I got was, ooh, man, they jumped on me. Because we had this spill a couple of years ago. A pipe broke, an old pipe broke, and so a couple of members on the board, boy, they are just, whatever it takes, fix it, because we don't want that to happen again. And I'm going, yeah, well, let's fix it, but it's gonna be a multi-million-dollar project, so keep informed on that.
All right, thank you. The Policy and Finance Committee met on September 12th. We reviewed the report of compensation and reimbursements for fiscal year 2017. And we also reviewed a local preference policy for competitive bid procurement. That's all I have. Next
This
is,
report I already gave.
what's that?
This report I already gave. October's meeting,
I couldn't hear.
finance? Are we talking about finance?
No, he's talking about
Sorry,
Encino.
Encino,
Encino.
policy
Oh,
and finance
sorry,
for
sorry,
Encino.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
By the
Okay.
way, I might add one thing to Jim's report, which I thought was interesting. Totally non-related to water, I attended a conference that had a lot of consultants there. And the biggest joke was who could come up with the best consultant joke. And the one that I like the best out of all of them, I'll try to use these sparingly in the future, is a consultant. He's the guy that borrows your watch to tell you what time it is. That's consultant number one. I'll continue, but because you brought up a consultant, I went, yeah, okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, next is standing committees. I think we had one engineering committee on September 11th.
Yes, we did. And I know minutes are in the meeting, in the agenda, but the highlights where we talked about the men's locker room, solar RFP, a groundwater RFP, master plan update, and then the freeway sewer possible update. If there's any questions specifically, I'd be happy to go into it. And we don't need to go into more than was in the minutes. But it was a great meeting, and we're going to have another one on the, Diane knows. Don't worry, Diane. It's coming up.
It'll be before the 11th.
Yes, before the 11th. Thank you. Don't worry about it, Diane. The 9th, thank you.
Okay, next is director's reports on travel, conferences, and seminars attended. Start with Director Snow.
I did not attend anything.
Okay. Mark.
I attended COA yesterday, and we were given more information on the Lower Colorado River and its problems, and Lake Mead's problems, and another idea of the cures or work with it. It was very interesting.
Probably need to get another water bond.
Another water bond will fix everything.
Yeah.
Another $20 billion.
Okay. I attended the Council of Water Utilities meeting yesterday as well. I found it interesting. It's always amazing to me, the web of legal entanglements on the Colorado River. So not a simple thing. It's very complex. But I guess the kind of the summary of all the issues or problems on the Colorado is that water was divvied up in the wettest century in the last 1,500 years, and that kind of sums up what the problem is.
Yeah.
Okay, Director Hernandez.
Yeah, I also attended the same meeting and got the same information out of it, so I'll not bore you with any more than that. But I also did attend the Headwaters tour, and I'm telling you, I would recommend that tour for all of us. It was very, very educational.
When are they offering it again, do you know?
Probably next year, you know, they probably, but they haven't done it in 3 or 4 years, and so I said, well, you need to do this more often. We went up to Sacramento, caught a bus, drove up to a number of the different areas, the Upper Truckee, the Truckee Marsh, the restoring marshes, went to UC Davis Center up there in Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe itself. Here's an interesting piece of economic interest. $2 billion with a B, $2 billion has been spent on Lake Tahoe in the last 20 years to clarify the water to pre-Comstock levels, which was 100 feet, you can see down 100 feet. It was to 70. Now the $2 billion later, they're getting close to 82. So I finally asked the guy, so why are you spending all this money on another 18 feet? And it was about tourism and about, because water quality in the lake is magnificent, visualization. There's no life or death reason to continue to do it. That's for darn sure. And so it seemed to be a little outrageous. But the tour itself was very informative. You know, the foundation, Water Foundation, always does a great job, and I would highly recommend it to anybody that's interested. It's all about the watershed, the forests, and how, because of the group of folks who don't want to do anything, let it go. It's overgrown underneath, and when the fire starts, whew, tens of thousands, hundred thousands of acres get burnt, and the worst part is it cooks the ground so nothing can grow back. And so that's really the detriment. And they're never going to catch up. The amount of money and the amount of work that is necessary to thin out the forest the way they were when the Native Americans were here is never gonna catch up with the amount of forest that is out there. So we're gonna always have the problem.
Well, thank you for that uplifting report.
Yes.
Director Evans.
Well, I was at the cattle meeting also, and I wanted to add what I found most interesting and maybe a bit hopeful was that when the speaker, Chris, was saying, as you mentioned, Director Elitharp, that the river was divvied up at the wettest season, that the basin, the lower basin states anyway, I don't know if all of them are doing it, but they're now running their models, computer models, and they decided it might be smart to not just do the last 10 or the last 20 and the last 40 as normal and the last 100. They decided to run a loop that was the last, wasn't it 3 years?
16.
16.
Or the last 16, which has all the droughts in it, and just run it like if that continued over and over and over. And that made them sit up and go, holy moly, are we in trouble? Because it's quite different. And it's just nice to see somebody is looking at what it is and where it's really probably going to go rather than, everything is really great. Now if we can just get them together. I thought it was very interesting, a lot of information, and as they've said, a lot of long history and a lot of legal battles, but I hope we're all going to be cooperative.
Okay.
That's it.
Other business, there's information in the agenda on the Aquafall Conference. And so next is director's comments and future agenda items. Director Snow.
I just want to say, when I first came on the board, I went through a pretty comprehensive kind of new board member orientation, but never once was I told about the $1.5 million, and I'm kind of upset about it. So,
We're hiding it from
good secret, guys, good secret.
All right, Director Martin.
I'd just like to comment that really on this process, which is very difficult, raising rates, that staff has just done an absolutely superb job of presenting. Presenting tonight was a little lengthy, but the amount of time we put on it and the people that wrote letters were all answered. I think that staff did an excellent job, and seeing as our only employee is General Manager Pruitt, I want to thank you, General Manager Pruitt, and I'll let you thank your staff. But
And I certainly will. They did a great job.
It was a great job done by all.
Well, I'll echo those comments, but I'll go ahead and thank everybody. Everybody did a great job. It was a very well-coordinated budget process, very integrated and very logical process. Thank you.
and very detailed, so that if we wanted to drill down, we could understand it and find out just where it all is and where it's all going. So I did appreciate that, and also want to thank the staff. I do have another comment that's going to come up, and I'm sure we're going to get painted with the same brush. The school district is clamoring about the lack of schools and all the development and water, and it's just wrong. Their numbers are wrong, their projections are wrong, the thinking about that they have nowhere to go, they're stuck, is wrong, and I just know we're gonna somehow get painted in there that they're not gonna have any water for them anyway, so.
Water for who?
Schools.
We have plenty of water for school.
I know we do, but they're.
Are you forewarning us?
I'm forewarning you.
Are
Be
you-
careful, it's coming down the
You've
line,
looked
we're gonna
into
get
the
painted.
globe, and I bet you're right.
Yeah.
Are you thinking that maybe the school district failed to plan accordingly? I mean, were they the only ones that didn't see the growth happening over the last 25 years?
More than appropriately, but inappropriately is what they're planning, and some of the citizens out there are saying that this is nothing to do with reality, that they've been offered sites and offered solutions, and they just can't do it. So there's some other motivation out there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I too have heard the last couple of months, and actually we traced it back to two political sources. It's the beginning of the silly season, It's over a year away,
Uh,
but there are some politicians starting early. And what they're gonna be is, they're gonna be no-growth candidates that are gonna be running. And they're starting to use water and anything, and not enough schools and not enough, so, and they're running for both city council and for the school district.
Yeah.
So that's where it's starting from, this groundswell. So the quicker we throw water on it, the better off we all are before they go wacko politicizing
I
it.
can't fathom or even imagine any explanation that's outside the responsibility of the school district on this one. And I don't know, I mean, it's gonna be really interesting to see how they try to spin their way out of this, but the sole responsibility, any way, shape, or form, how you slice it, dice it, cut it, spin it, fake news it, whatever, it's the school district's responsibility and their lack of planning. If they don't have enough schools, they have nobody to blame but themselves.
Director Evans, did you have any comments?
I was gonna say, sometimes they have nobody else to blame but themselves, but they want everyone else to pay to fix it.
Mhm.
And that's our challenge. I want to also reiterate to the staff and to our GM for an absolutely marvelous job of presenting. And I know a lot of what you presented is stuff you'd always done, but you had a board that asked and you stepped up to it, and we gave you a lot of tough questions. And I know the finance committee had a lot of tough questions. I appreciate so much that you just stepped up to it and answered those questions and then did such beautiful presentations for the public. I thought tonight's presentation, for all the information was in there, was very well said, and appreciated everybody's comments. And I'm, as always, just really proud of this district, and I do believe our staff is our greatest asset, and I truly want you to know I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I do have one other shout out to give, someone who's no longer with us, but John Fusco. He did a superb job in explaining in the committees that I was in. And I know he's no longer with us, and I think that's a big loss to Vallecitos, but I would like to thank him, whoever sees him, thank him.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think
We
we're,
didn't do like a going away thing for John, or what?
John didn't want anything big. He wanted to kind of ride off into the sunset.
You didn't want a bottle of tequila like Dennis?
No?
Shit.
How was the GM?
Yeah.
I don't think most employees do they?
okay, we're
They
at the end of our
disappear.
agenda, so we're adjourned.
Good.